Hey folks, this is a pre-video call to action thing where I ask for money. You can skip to this timestamp if you find me more entertaining than persuasive. Basically, I just want to plug my Patreon at patreon.com/regularpat, by far the best and easiest way to support me if you enjoy my stuff. There are various tiers. You get some additional stuff from me if you pledge at any of them. I've been doing a weekly patron Q&A for a few months now. If you ever want to pick my brain about some Cage 4 idea, force me to do a tier list, or ask me why I'm so smelly, all examples of things we've done throughout the series so far. I am eternally grateful for my patron community. I do this and Twitch full-time, and they are a massive pillar of support for me. They deserve a ton of credit for granting me so much of my freedom as a creator. Like, the better the Patreon does, the less I have to worry about making a video I don't really want to make, putting out clickbait, or taking sponsorships that I don't believe in, and believe me, my inbox is full of them. And I'm not above taking one that really speaks to me, but Popeyes hasn't reached out yet. That's all. Think I'm all done begging. Let me just Oliver Twist on out of here and let you enjoy this piping hot content.
Okay.
In my mind, there are three great foundational figures in the world of comedy: George Carlin, Richard Pryor, and Tetsuya Nomura? But it wasn't always that way. Back in the early 2000s, thanks to a chance encounter in an elevator, an executive for Square... So today I want to take a look at how humor is used throughout the Kingdom Hearts series. I don't think I or many people would describe all of these games as consistently funny, and your mileage will obviously vary when it comes to what jokes are landing or flopping. But from my perspective, some of the games are leagues funnier than others, and I want to deep dive into why that is and how the use of comedic moments in these games has evolved throughout the past 20 years. This video is going to be something of a mishmash of a few different ideas, which I want you to view as creative and avant-garde instead of what it really is, which is sloppy and directionless. If you've been watching the channel for a while, you know I like to rank things. If you're new here, I like to rank things. So I definitely want to put these games into a sort of funniness tier list.
You know what's funny?
I know, you may be worried about my credentials for this exercise, like who am I to decide what is or is not funny? Rest assured, I did stand-up comedy a few times nearly 10 years ago, so I think I know a thing or two. But if for whatever reason you're not convinced by that, I do have another method I want to test out here. The coolest thing about humor is that you can boil it down to obvious and objective components, and from there figure out which of two things is the funniest by comparing the mathematical data. So I've devised a system to do just that in service of our goal here today, the funniness aggregation rating technique. Well, not only will I be giving my subjective thoughts on each game's humor, I will also be using advanced science to figure out which games are attempting humor most often and which games are humorless ghouls. You might be wondering how I can even attempt to do that, and I'm gonna level with you here, and I'm not happy about this. Over the past few weeks, I have watched every cutscene in the series. Every cutscene. In fact, I watched long plays for most of the games, as the game's humor isn't always just confined to theater mode cutscenes. As I did this, I took both notes and a hard look at myself in the mirror, and Antipad unfortunately gave me the finger and told me to get back to work. Across 200-something hours of Kingdom Hearts, I made note of every time there was a funny. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I was as generous as I could possibly be when counting up these humor points. I basically watched each scene as if I were Jimmy Fallon. I'll be honest, I've already seen all of this stuff so many times that almost none of this is getting an audible reaction out of me anymore, or even an exhale out the nose, but I can, for the most part, remember what I did find especially funny the first time through. So while I was marking down all the moments that I found / still find genuinely amusing, I also gave credit for every attempt at humor, as benign, toothless, or repetitive it may have been. So we're sort of looking for intentionality here, which normally I don't think is a super useful thing to do when analyzing media, if you could call this that, but I don't think the practice as used here will really damage or meddle with how we interpret these games. I'm just looking at each moment and going, yeah, that was meant to add some levity or be used for comic relief, even if I didn't personally find it incredibly funny, and believe me, there are plenty of moments like that. Of course, just counting up the moments and comparing from game to game isn't fair, since longer games will naturally have more time to make more attempts at humor. So what we're really looking for here is not necessarily how many attempted har-hars, but the ratio of attempted har-hars for each game. A humor attempt ratio, or HAR.
Hardy har.
To do this, I'm using a website called How Long to Beat, which provides an aggregated runtime length from pulled players that can give us an estimate of how long it takes to beat a given game. I decided to use the reported average times for the original versions of games that also have Final Mix releases. The Final Mix versions, while containing more content, sometimes have shorter average playtimes. For example, OG Kingdom Hearts 2 has a main story length of about 32 hours, while KH2 Final Mix is 29.5 hours. I'm chalking that up to many people having already played the original version, and thus being able to get through the Final Mix version more quickly since they might be better at the game and are more likely to skip familiar cutscenes. In the same vein, I'm looking at the game versions of Days and Recoded, not the HD remix movies, since so many funny moments are cut in the transition from game to movie. The site also has options for main story, main plus extra, and completionist, and I'll just be using the main story times, but adding in Remind's time to KH3's total. I know this isn't a perfect system, but I think it's the closest I can get to some sort of standardized way of measuring each game's horror. Originally, I was just going to use the combined length of each game's cutscenes, but ran into the issue of text-based games like Days and Recoded not really having a definitive cutscene runtime. It sort of depends on how fast you read. Plus, I realized that some things we'll be factoring in are gameplay-based, which wouldn't be accounted for if we're only using the cutscene length, so it makes sense to me to include gameplay time. There is always time to be funny, even when you're slaughtering Heartless and nobodies. I had to make some exceptions for more particular titles, but I feel like this is the best I can do while maintaining my sanity. Last note before we actually get started here, you might be wondering, what about things that aren't supposed to be funny, but totally are? And I hear you, in fact, there may be more unintentionally funny things throughout the series than things that are supposed to make you laugh. I'll talk about these moments when they pop up, but when it comes to figuring out a game's horror using the fart, I'm leaving such moments in their own category, not affecting the data. There are a lot of things in this category that have undergone a sort of meta-mimetic mutation and are the subject of fandom. What's the word, you know, when everyone gathers around and sort of, like with each other, oval jacking, we'll call it. Like, yes, Mickey is wearing the edgy coat and saying the edgy thing, I fucking get it. Reddit? More like, I fucking get it. And I mean, I'm guilty of this too. I find literally everything Clayton says funny, but that's the result of multi-decade-long brain rot and not really from any intentionality on the part of the writers. I giggle every time Ansem the Wise calls himself a fool, but it's mostly thanks to my nostalgia over the KH-Vid's opening sequence. There are plenty of quotes delivered full-throatedly that sound ridiculous out of context, and even sometimes with context, but I don't think it's fair to count them when it seems fairly obvious that the game intends for us to take these moments deathly seriously. But these are still relevant to the conversation at hand, so we'll still discuss them despite being in a different genre, so to speak. I guess I should also say, for the sake of clarity, I definitely do not think how funny a game is, or attempts to be, correlates to how good it is as an overall experience. Sometimes my perception of general quality and the amount of humor will align, and sometimes it will not. So, with further ado, and without further ado, let's take a look at Kingdom Hearts 1.
You gotta look funny, like us. Yup. Whoa.
So, as established in several past videos, KH1 was my first Kingdom Hearts game, and I first played it in 2002 at the age of 6. Now, my sense of humor has changed since then. That is to say, it has degraded severely. I think saying little instead of little is one of the funniest things a person can do. Nobody does that even once in KH1, but I was a bit more sophisticated 21 years ago, and I remember KH1 hitting pretty hard for me, especially in the early hours. And let's talk about those early parts actually, because this project had me thinking about them in a way I hadn't before. I do think these early portions are where KH1 is the strongest humor-wise, and this is pretty much entirely through the efforts of Donald and Goofy. And like, I had remembered enjoying and laughing at the physical comedy happening at Disney Castle back in the day, I guess I didn't remember or just never really thought about how comparatively unfunny all of the Destiny Islands and original character stuff is. Unlike KH2 or 3, which will have several humorous exchanges between its original characters in the early hours, KH1 will, at most, show brief moments of levity between Sora, Riku, and Kairi, but never anything that's really knocking on the door of a joke. But I think this is perfect, to be honest, because KH1 kind of has to both prove itself as something new and unique and give the people what they want in a timely manner. I'm willing to bet that conservatively somewhere around 80% of buyers bought Kingdom Hearts for the Disney stuff, especially when considering younger demographics. Granted, to get your first taste of that Disney stuff, you need to make it through a literal nightmare sequence that doesn't exactly evoke the Magic Kingdom or silly old bears, but as soon as you see Donald marching through the colonnade, we're off to the races. They understood the assignment, from Donald knocking on the big door only to reveal a lethal door, all the way through the fake-out gummy ship blast-off where the world poops them out. It's constant comedy. The Disney Castle half of the prologue really only takes a break from the sillier stuff to establish the stakes through Mickey's letter, and even then, once characters are talking out loud again in the same scene, we're getting back to jokes and physical gags. Meanwhile, on Destiny Islands, we're getting to know our main characters, learning about the world, and being introduced to what'll become long-running themes throughout the narrative for the next 2 decades. And for the record, I don't think it's a bad thing or a weak point that there's not as much goofing around on Destiny Islands, because that only further highlights the contrast between the worlds that are about to collide. It's scary to see Ansem in the secret place, it's terrifying when the Heartless invade the islands, and those moments are comfortably nestled between Saturday morning cartoon hijinks featuring some of the most recognizable characters in the world. A meeting of the frightening and the unknown with the safe and familiar. That's the true crossover, and it always has been, with my apologies to Cloud and Leon. KH1 gives you what you came for and some likely unexpected reasons to stay quickly and efficiently. It never really compromises on its vision during that dive to the heart and the days spent on the island, but is self-aware enough to cater to our nostalgia and tickle our funny bones in pretty much equal shares, at least when we're just talking about that early batch of cutscenes. So, good job, KH1. We're all still here, and some of us are even watching regular Pat talk about you 21 years later, so clearly you did something right. Speaking more generally, the vehicle for humor throughout the entire game is definitely the Disney cast, which makes sense and is the right move. I guess it's kind of the only move, since our original cast is literally 4 characters, none of which share a ton of screen time with each other outside of the opening and closing moments of the game. And Sora, while given a few traits early on, still kinda needs to shop for a personality, so as he gains some experience throughout his travels, he's usually either playing the straight man to a Disney character or just witnessing other characters bounce off of each other. We'll see a markedly different Sora by the time we reach KH3, a Sora who can not only run on walls and slice through buildings, but one who can appreciate a good bit and can hold his own comedically against his cartoony counterparts. And that's not to say they never use Sora as a comedic focal point, albeit to varying results, ranging from charming if a bit awkward, to genuinely amusing if only due to good timing,
We visited so many places in the world.
to just kind of odd.
Hey!
Like, you're trying to verify Riku's tangibility and your first thought is to stick your fingers in his mouth?
I don't know.
On that note, while all of the games dabble in physical comedy at least a bit, slapstick feels like KH1's bread and butter, which isn't too surprising. It's a simple form of comedy for a comparatively simpler game. It also makes sense that the dialogue isn't really stealing the show here comedically, since there's not a whole lot of it to begin with. But even outside of cutscenes, stuff like the red and yellow trinities lean into the physical comedy, and this is also seen in combat-oriented moments, like Genie's half-hearted attacks during the Jafar fight, or lighting Hook on fire and watching him defy gravity like a Looney Tune to avoid the crocodile. I even gave KH1 points for the Traverse Town mailbox, because honestly, honest to God, what the fuck? But from 2002 to this day, I think the funniest physical gag in the series is Donald getting pancaked by the door in the Traverse Town Hotel. There's just so much chaotic energy in this scene, and this is the cherry on top. Some other highlights as far as physical gags go include Donald pulling down the camera in a moment that leans on the fourth wall, Tink absolutely destroying Donald's bill with a kick, Sebastian being terrified of upside down Donald, and Sebastian and Donald being terrified of right side up Ursula. As you may have noticed, Donald is doing a lot of heavy lifting in this game, which reminds me that I also want to assign an MVP for each game, and the Duck is running away with the title for KH1, no contest. I know we're spending a lot of time here on KH1, but 1, are you truly surprised? And 2, we're laying a lot of groundwork for the games to come. I just wanted to briefly introduce the thread of the games pulling comedic lines or moments from their featured Disney properties, which is something KH1 actually doesn't really do very much, which is sort of reflective of its overall approach to the Disney worlds. KH2 and 3 will have worlds that follow the plot of the movies much more closely, in some cases scene by scene, and they both incorporate more comedic moments that originated in said movies. If a character's general personality and mannerisms are played for laughs in the movie, like say the Queen of Hearts or Captain Hook, that'll carry over and be portrayed the same way in KH1, but there aren't really specific moments or references like future games will make. The only real example to the contrary I can think of is Phil's quirk regarding his inability to count, which, good lord, is that going to get a lot of play throughout the series. In contrast, we have moments that seem out of character and or left field, like Turk having the hots for Donald. I can't imagine the movie version of the character would be into that. Where I'm from, Rosies and Donalds do not get along. But in this case, I still found and find it funny, if only because Donald rebuffs her advances, not because he really shouldn't bone a random gorilla he just met, but because his girlfriend would be mad at him if he did. Before we move on to Chain of Memories, a few more highlights. That first convo between Donald and Goofy, this Abbott and Costello-ass misunderstanding, which I think still remains one of the most fun back and forths in the series. There's also Oogie Boogie overestimating his power over the Heartless and his bickering with Hook, Piglet eating shit outside Rabbit's house, that's just a turn of phrase, not literally, and Donald calling Goofy a big palooka, which was the funniest fucking sequence of words I had ever heard at the age of 6. Of course, we're also gifted some unintentionally funny moments in this first outing, like Cerberus stepping on Cloud Strife, Maleficent piecing out when first confronted by Sora, and lines like,
"I have some unfinished business with this puppet."
Or... Not taking those types of occurrences into account, I picked out 66 separate moments where KH1 was trying to make us laugh. Using the fart, I divided that by the average KH1 runtime on how long to beat of 1,710 minutes, and thus calculated KH1's horror to be 3.86%. That won't really mean much until we have other games to compare it to, so yeah. For me personally, I'm feeling a low A tier for KH1. It's not a gutbuster by any means, but it's also, in my opinion, gonna outshine a good handful of the games to come, at least when it comes to appealing to my own sensibilities. In Pooh's words,
"It is rather funny."
Let's take a stroll over to Castle Oblivion, shall we?
Something smells funny.
It probably doesn't come as a surprise that Naminé made everyone forget how to be funny, too. I'll reiterate again that the game being comparatively unfunny doesn't make it unenjoyable, at least for me. I think I might be higher on comm than most. For the record, I looked at Recom for the purposes of this project, which I don't think really sacrificed any humor in the leap from GBA to PS2. Well, maybe that's not technically true. COM doesn't have nearly as many moments played for laughs, and even fewer moments where humor is being conveyed through gameplay, but the GBA version did have this slight called Blazing Donald, in which Donald, I guess, fucks up a fire spell and runs around haphazardly with his ass on fire. This wasn't preserved for Recom, but we did get the Wild Crush slight, which has Sora and Donald using Goofy as a human battering ram. Or a dog thing battering ram, I guess. This must be one of those times where Goofy gets hit on the head that he mentions in Cage 2, although he doesn't remember this instance either thanks to Naminé or a severe concussion. But as far as the story and dialogue are concerned, the humor is definitely dialed back quite a bit to help establish a much more oppressive and dangerous environment in Castle Oblivion. And like with the Cage 1 opening, I think it's good that COM lays off the gas because there really aren't very many reasons for SDG to be cracking each other up each time they climb a floor. They have a few occasions where they laugh and reminisce, like when they talk about Donald clobbering Shadow Sora, but most of their conversations are centered on the really scary thing that's gradually happening to them as they progress through the castle. As expected, most of the lighter moments come in the Disney worlds, which are all delivered through text bubbles regardless of which version of the game you're playing. Even these, though, are few and far between and aren't really hitting as hard as anything from the first game. Most of the jokier moments are saved for the post-boss cutscenes, and they usually feel pretty half-hearted, for lack of a better term. There is that one scene in Neverland where I guess Peter Pan drops a Moogle on Donald from above for some reason, like as a prank. Sora and Goofy think it's hilarious. I think the comedy is weaker in COM not just because of the nature of the game and the environment, which makes complete sense, but also because we're literally covering the same ground for like 90% of the game, seeing the same sights and interacting with the same characters. There isn't really a ton of new material to mine, and in most cases we're meeting familiar faces again for what feels like the first time, so there's not even an angle of familiarity to work with for the sake of humor. But again, I think the game is stronger for it. There aren't a ton of highlights, but I do enjoy Goofy genuinely wondering if Sora is somehow indebted to Vexen, like prior to all of them having met in the first game. Recom also has that part where Pooh gets completely fucking bowled over by a runaway pumpkin, which I still find pretty funny if only for how abruptly it happens. My top pick would have to go to this late game moment after the 12th floor where Sora gives his big sappy speech to Naminé and Donald comments on how it might be just a bit too saccharine.
Oh brother, that's a bit much.
It's a rare moment of KH sort of acknowledging its tendency to occasionally launch into Full House moral of the story speeches, and it's refreshing. This is followed by this saucy fucking shit-eating wink that Donald does, and I don't know if winks can be shit-eating, but if they can be, I know this qualifies. Once again, I think Donald is the MVP for the game. He's not leagues ahead of everyone else this time, but he's involved with more things I found genuinely amusing than anyone else is. Axel has some snarky remarks here and there, but he's definitely spending way more time in genuinely intimidating villain mode in this game, so I think Donald deserves his flowers this time.
Yeah, I was pretty good.
I should note that Riku's story is, as you'd probably expect, even more serious than Sora's, as I really only counted 3 moments that could even remotely qualify as an attempt at humor. This is not counting the litany of comments made about various characters' smelliness, Mickey Mouse refusing to murder a teenage boy upon request, or the Riku replica's famous and intrinsically Kingdom Hearts line,
I'm me, he says.
we're gonna start to see more things that are easier to laugh at than with, and I think some of these reverse rebirth moments mark the beginning of that. Other unintentionally funny moments include Sora's comment that the Neverland rooms are all starting to look the same, which I don't think is self-aware. It'd be a weird thing for the game to poke fun at, like as late as the 7th floor and beyond, but I could be wrong. I am also nearly guaranteed to always laugh at Oogie Boogie tackling Sally, which is so extra for absolutely no reason. But in calculating the game's HAR, I actually picked out half as many moments as I found in KH1, 33, which will divide by Calm's average runtime in minutes and multiply by 100 to get a HAR of 2.34%, unsurprisingly lower than KH1. My own ranking is going to reflect that. I think Calm safely belongs in the C tier, and that may seem high given its tepid performance here, but we got a lot of games left to look at. Let's ditch this castle and take a look at KH2.
Very funny.
Funny?
Regular Pad has mixed feelings on KH2, more at 11. I think no other game in the series feels quite like a Kingdom Hearts TV show in the way that KH2 does. The game is episodic in nature, which most of the games are to an extent, but KH2's more insulated and self-concerned worlds are most evocative of a story of the week Disney Channel sitcom style. Back when the games first came out, I preferred KH2 over 1, but even then, I remember finding this game less funny. I don't really think I went from an easily amused 6-year-old to a jaded and cynical 9-year-old. In reality, I just don't think KH2's brand of humor appealed to me quite as much. As I mentioned, KH2 gives me big Disney Channel energy, a channel that I found grating and obnoxiously unsubversive even as a child, and even in spite of my love for Disney movies, the Disney theme parks, and obviously Kingdom Hearts. Of course, the people responsible for writing and localizing the KH games were not the same people writing Hannah Montana episodes, but it's sort of fitting that this game came out at the same time as the height of shows like that, or DCOMs like High School Musical, which, maybe snobbishly, I always found to be the unfunniest schlock on children's TV channels. I'm not saying I'm better than the people who watched Disney Channel in 2005 through 7 because I was watching Ned's Declassified and Drake and Josh, except I am saying that, that's what I'm saying. KH2 even introduces the closest thing the games get to a studio audience, which is a dedicated music track that plays for what are supposed to be comedic or lighthearted moments. Okay, in fairness, KH1 technically did that first with Oopsie Daisy, but it's only used one time and it's more of a jingle than an actual song.
That sounds kind of familiar.
For the record, I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I like laughter and merriment. I've used it in videos countless times and probably right now. I just think it merits mentioning that this kind of feeds into that more structured, TV-like approach that KH2 takes. Like, here's the funny song, this is the part where something funny happens, we're playing this now so you know that it's time to laugh. And in fairness, sometimes funny things do happen during these scenes, they just didn't and don't often hit as hard as similar moments in KH1 or 3. By this point in the exercise of watching every cutscene in the series, I was starting to struggle with unpacking the difference between funny, cute, and clever. And as someone who's all three, it was really difficult to put aside my biases and find the truth. KH2 is chock full of things that might cause you to smirk or exhale the tiniest bit of air from your nostrils, but not a ton of stuff that actually elicited laughter from my kid self, like all of those D&G moments in the KH1 prologue. Speaking of prologues though, the KH2 opening follows a similar and I think successful formula that KH1 used, bouncing between the playful ribbing between Roxas and HPO and the former's non-existential crisis. We're once again getting the juxtaposition of something that feels comfy and familiar, a couple of friends hanging out in the final days of summer vacation, and the build-up to this unavoidable and unfair tragedy. Roxas's unfortunate fate is more felt and works because we got such a substantial amount of time where we're seeing him goofing around with his friends. We have a slice of normality, we know how things could and should be. Some standouts from the prologue include Hayner's ulcer, Rai's Phil-like inability to count, and Setzer referring to Roxas as Rucksack. I also like when HPO teased Roxas about him looking happy near a girl when he literally looks like the most depressed person I've ever seen in a video game. I also want to be fair to KH2 and talk about this trope that I think is unfairly assigned to it more often than it should be, and I've done it myself. I want to dissect the concept of KH2 overusing the cliche of a Disney World ending with everyone in the group laughing as we zoom out or pan up. In my memory, I could have sworn that like at least 3/4 of the KH2 Disney World visits end like that, but I combed through everything and it hardly even happens at all. Here's a list of every time it ever happens in the series. KH1 Deep Jungle, Turk is horny for Donald. KH1 Atlantica, Sebastian says he wants to be left out of any future hijinks. Nobody actually laughs, but I know in my bones that if this were in a post-KH1 game, they would have laughed here. Calm Wonderland, Donald flips out over Goofy also being fooled by Alice's gaslighting. Again, no one laughs, but same energy as the Sebastian scene. Calm Atlantica, again, no one laughs, but Sora is getting lectured by Jiminy for suggesting that Ariel tell a lie. It again has the same energy. Calm Neverland, Sora and Goofy think it's hilarious that Donald's spine is broken by the Moogle. KH2 Land of Dragons 1, I guess. Sora tells Mulan and Shang to play nice, they giggle, Mushu laughs for uncomfortably long, but no one's laughing by the time SDG leave. KH2 Disney Castle, the group laughs as Daisy chases Donald, though it's not technically the last thing to happen in the world as Sora has to unlock the keyhole. KH2 Port Royal 2, the group laughs at Jack and Sora's similarities, but there's another sequence about Jack that plays after that before the world closes out. BBS Olympus Coliseum as Ven, where Zack gets roasted by Ven and everyone laughs. KH3 Olympus, where Donald bemoans Sora's cockiness and everyone laughs. KH3 Kingdom of Corona, Flynn gets tongued in the earhole, everyone laughs. KH3 100 Acre Wood, everyone sorta giggles at the flower petals in the air, hilarious. KH3 San Francisco, everyone laughs as Sora and Hero bicker about the second Baymax, which, fuck you don't need two of them, you owe me, I carried, fuck Hero. That's all of them. So really KH3 does it the most, and they don't even do it that much in general throughout the series. I don't know where I got the idea in my head that they use it as a crutch. I also want to give KH2 some credit for making Sora much less passive and not always just having him watch the Disney shenanigans from the sidelines. He'll crack a few jokes, he'll tease people, he'll lose his mind over Santa Claus, and he'll also get into a fist fight over basically nothing, which is the best slapstick moment in this game. I think a Sora-led moment is actually one of the funniest in the game, when Riku asks how he'll face everyone again, and Sora responds,
"Like this?"
I mentioned how the games will start to pull more directly from the movies, both in their general plot structure and their comedy, and that starts to happen more often in KH2, with moments like the three fairies arguing over Sora's clothes, Pumbaa's insistence that he be referred to as Mr. Pig, and the whole bit about the hyenas laughing at Mufasa's name, subbed out for Simba here. Sometimes they work and the game is smart to pull those moments, and sometimes they need to ease the fuck up, like when they continue to beat the Phil counting thing into the fucking ground.
That isn't funny!
But the funniest KH2 moments, for my money, are things original to the game. A few highlights. Hades nonchalantly flicking Sora to the ground, Demyx's general approach to organization procedures, and this pair of funny and badass Final Fantasy lines.
No wonder no one wants to die.
Might be tough if one more shows up.
I do also think that KH2 is the easiest KH game to make fun of, as a lot of those meme-to-death moments I mentioned earlier originate in this game, and they really ramp up during the mid-game point. There's an embarrassment of riches here, between a rock killing Goofy and everyone taking it seriously, Donald Duck commenting on the presence of Sephiroth, the Safe Fellows moment, and Mickey Mouse saying and putting his entire rodent tussie into, "They'll pay for this." This is potentially the point in the series where KH looks most ridiculous to the outsider looking in, and despite being one of the best parts of this game, it would probably not be among the first things I show or describe to a person I'm trying to get into the franchise. I'd still maintain that one of KH's strongest suits is not being constantly self-aware of what it is, or winking at the player and acknowledging how silly some of this might seem, but you could argue it gets a bit carried away with itself here. Some other unintentionally funny moments from other points in the game include Jafar's creepy laugh montage that never actually happened in KH1, Winnie the Pooh astral projecting, and of course, the crown jewel.
That was undeniable proof that we totally owned you, lamers.
I don't think the word lamers has ever had a bigger moment in the sun than this cipher quote here. 2006 was the peak for lamers, and it'll never reach that high again. Trying to name an MVP for KH2 was actually the toughest because nobody's really getting a genuine laugh out of me more than maybe once. There's honestly a case to give it to Donald yet again, but I think to avoid the repetition, I'll give it to Pete this time. I know I literally haven't mentioned him until now, but he's consistently the butt monkey for both his enemies and allies, and while I'm not like losing my mind every time he's on screen, the game is usually going for something funny with him. This includes some more decent slapstick with the peddler, him insulting and assaulting his past self, being mistaken for fat Aladdin by the genie, and tumble fucking down Pride Rock in his grotesque lion form.
That's right!
So in calculating KH2's horror, I counted 122 moments that seem to be going for humor. Though as I mentioned, KH2 is swinging a lot more often, but not landing a ton of hits, at least for me. Despite the fact that KH2's average playtime isn't that much higher than KH1 or Comms, it certainly has way more cutscenes, which is where the bulk of these moments happen, and probably highlights a flaw in my system. But this gives us a horror of 6.35%, the highest so far. As for my own ranking, I'm thinking top of B tier for KH2, but I wouldn't really blame anyone for having it above KH1 in this regard, it's just a matter of what sort of jokes you find funnier. Let's move on over to 358 Days over 2.
What a joke.
So just up front, Days is a deceptively funny game, or at least funnier than you might expect for a game that ends like this, but this is all contingent on actually playing it instead of watching the remix movie. I mentioned this occasionally in my video in which I ranked every day, but when you watch the movie version, not only do you lose the relatability of the daily grind and the more gradual development of character relationships, you also just lose some solid jokes and bits. The obvious example is the exclusion of the Roxas that's a stick moment, which is undoubtedly funny, but sort of overshadows how amusing the rest of the game can be. I think Days has a couple of things going for it, and I might be off with this, but I wonder if most of the game being relegated to text actually helps the humor instead of hindering it. There might be something to the idea that these lines have a higher likeliness of succeeding because there's no chance of them being botched by bad or stilted delivery or awkward gaps in dialogue and long pauses. Of course, good timing and delivery can also take something that's maybe not as funny on paper or as just text and elevate it, which I think we'll see a lot of in games like KH3 and Back Cover. The success of a joke or bit is still going to largely depend on the writing at the end of the day, but I do think Days might have an advantage in how the player needs to fill in the gaps and imagine how something might sound instead of hearing it delivered maybe a bit too cheesily. Days is also aided, especially in its earlier portions, by something of a fish out of water trope and how Roxas is totally new not just to the organization or visiting Disney worlds or video game conventions that we take as a given, but life itself. You normally don't get to see that with a character who isn't like in a diaper and crying. Okay, he cries sometimes, but I'm still assuming that the castle has toilets and that everyone knows how to use them. We get to spend a lot of time with this baby Bambi Roxas, who learns for the first time what things like love and summer vacation are, or the weird noises that people make when they're happy, or that, yes, we tend to open chests because they have stuff inside them. Roxas's ignorance and reaction to these new concepts is just kind of funny, and the beautiful thing is that it can double as really fucking sad too, since Roxas keeps learning about these things and concepts that he'll either never get to experience or has been told are incompatible with his very being. He spends so much of the game as Squidward watching SpongeBob and Patrick run outside, you almost feel kind of bad for laughing at how he doesn't know what laughing is. The third major pillar in Days' humor is the strength and versatility of its cast, who all have their quirks and things, so to speak. The writers knew we wanted to see some of these characters interact after seeing them in Calm and 2, and they don't often squander their chances when they get a new combination of characters talking with each other and saying some funny stuff. I still think we could have been given a bit more between members who aren't in the main trio, but this still remains the only game where Axel and Xigbar get to have a conversation. I mean, they technically have a short back and forth in Dream Drop, but that's not Axel, that's Lee. Even still, it's fun to see Roxas play off of Larxene or Demyx or even Zaldin in some spots. Lastly, there's something to be said about the more grounded and natural conversations had between specifically the Ice Cream Trio. I know some people might see the words Kingdom Hearts and grounded or natural next to each other and start laughing at that, but at least in the context of the rest of the series, Days is one of the best at this. The conversations, and by extension the humor, feel more relatable, like they're just friends shooting the shit after work, whether they're teasing each other or shit-talking their coworkers. For me, it works because it feels a bit more real than these games usually tend to. This is also the first game where the bulk of the comedy isn't coming from Disney characters, in fact very little of it is. Which makes sense, as Roxas is usually trying to avoid detection from Disney characters, and the ones he does interact with still can't fucking count. Most of the humor comes from those more subdued but still sometimes punchy conversations between the original characters. And I think Days is even unique in that, unlike the other games where funny moments are employed solely for the purpose of comic relief, the very fact that these characters are being funny and making jokes with each other serves the story itself, or at the very least our understanding of how nobodies do or do not work. So that's pretty cool. As for some highlights, one of my favorite moments, like laugh out loud moments, is when Roxas or Axel close their eyes and get on their tippy toes trying to fly. They just look so stupid, it cracks me up. There's also an actually funny Phil moment when we zoom out after he realizes he's been training some nobody, lowercase n. Speaking of, the moment when Roxas comments, "That's not very nice," when he hears about capital N nobodies for the first time. Larxene is providing a lot in the short time she's here, between her first mission with Roxas, advising him to bash his head against the glass, and her preemptive rebuffing of his advances. There's also Axel's flippin' "yes sir, whatever you say sir," and this sassy fucking gesture. Days doesn't have quite as many unintentionally funny moments as KH2, but you might catch yourself laughing at Roxas deciding that his answer to a directionless day off is simply ice cream, or Riku dubbing himself the biggest nobody of all. Or, you know, the last thing Shion hears before she dies. I could get into that again, but I already have in said Days ranking video. Initially, I thought the day's MVP was going to be Axel, but he's so embroiled in the drama and involved in all of these secret meetings with Syx, he's still usually more serious than funny. This time around, the crown goes to Demyx, who's usually delivering in every scene he's in. I know some people find him annoying, but he's a character I've always enjoyed even from just his few scenes in Cage 2, and he's in top form throughout Days. Really thankful he didn't get sent off to CO. I love any sequence where he's trying to worm his way out of work and Roxas has to pull teeth to try and ultimately fail to get him to do his fair share. A lot of funny Demyx lines are actually missable moments in the gray area at the start of each day, so I always made sure to chat with him before starting my missions. Even the secret reports aren't safe from his laziness and disdain for anything resembling work.
Yes! Demyx time!
Days ultimately gets a HAR of 5.41%, containing 86 moments that I counted as attempts at humor. Not too surprised that it's second highest after Cage 2, but I am sort of surprised that I'll be putting it in the lead so far, just ahead of Cage 1 in the A tier. I didn't expect to find Days to be the funniest out of these first 4, but research for both this project and the day ranking video left me with a good impression of the game's humor. And now we move from the old and dusty year of 2009 to the newfangled, shiny year of 2010.
Funny.
Oh, Birth by Sleep. I really do like you. You've got the spirit, but you're a weird little guy. Take everything I said about Days in the last part, flip it, and reverse it. Very little of the humor found in BBS has anything to do with the charisma of its main characters, and I like them, but they're all about as funny as you'd expect sheltered young adults who have lived in a castle all their lives to be. I can think of a handful of times where the friendship between RXA feels believable thanks to some joking around between them, and maybe one awkward attempt to lead us to the same conclusion with TVA. You two would make the weirdest brothers? I'm sorry, Awkward, but what does that even mean? I don't think Sora was particularly funny in his first game either, but you'd think between the three of them, surely somebody had to be the class clown during Keyblade lessons. I guess not. It's nuts that I'm saying this, but I think Ericus is the funniest person who lived in that world, given what he was like in Dark Road. I think of what we've seen so far, BBS is most similar to Cage 2 in its approach to humor, leaning a lot on the Disney inhabitants to crack jokes and make light of things. Birth by Sleep even crowns a successor to the dedicated laugh track, as Innocent Times is often used in places where laughter and merriment would have played if it were Cage 2. BBS also continues the trend of pulling specific quirks and quotes from the movies, like Doc's speech patterns or Gantu's insistence that he is merely big-boned, or Phil's, by this point, hilarious trait of being mathematically incapable. Thankfully, I find the former two funny enough to make up for the Phil thing, as well as his being like a sex pest throughout Aqua's Olympus visit, which I guess they also pulled from the movie. This is not to say that BBS has no funny moments original to the game, because it does have a handful. I think Ven's face and delivery on the "he said to bring 2 grown-ups" is legitimately one of the funniest parts of the game.
He said to take 2 grown-ups.
I might even laugh out loud on any given day where I'm treated to Pete being literally dragged to hell by the enchanted brooms as Minnie watches on menacingly. What on earth is Peter Pan doing to Mr. Smee here? Whatever it is, it's funny. Naturally, my favorite scene in the series, Memorized, in which Ven meets a young Lee and Isa, features some really charming and funny banter between the three. We also have some unintentionally funny highlights in the invisible cheering fans at the Coliseum, the information bar instructing us to put Peter Pan in his place, and Cinderella's stepfamily just fucking dying, I guess? I suppose one thing BBS has going for it is one of the funniest or wackiest environments in the series in Pete's Rec Room, this inexplicably large pinball machine in the bowels of Disney Town, which I guess casts that pinball reaction command that Sora uses on Pete in a sort of ironic light. Fittingly, it's in this room where each of your characters can discover the break time command, which is one of the funnier actions you can perform in the games. Let me just stop fighting these monsters to practice my dance moves. The two frontrunners for MVP here were Pete and Captain Hook, actually, both villains who are usually the butt of the joke, both with a comedic stranglehold on the worlds they appear in, and in all 3 campaigns too. Pete's transparent clout-chasing efforts and aggressively unhelpful helpfulness culminating in Disney Town's own January 6th is truly a sight to behold, and that was truly a sentence to fucking say. But I think I gotta give the edge to Captain Hook here, who was funny in Cage 1 but really steals the show in every scene he's in here. This is definitely elevated by Corey Burton's performance.
Idiot! Why didn't you tell me? You what?
It's honestly amazing that this man also voices Ansem the Wise and Dale, and like everyone else. He probably voices your grandmother in an uncredited role. I feel kinda bad that I don't really have any more meaningful observations to make about BBS, but it very much feels like the continuation of the status quo from Cage 2 as far as humor goes. I don't find it to be particularly funny or terribly unfunny. I don't think the humor ever undercuts anything, but it also isn't really used in an interesting way like it has been for a few of the past games. I picked out 56 humor attempts in BBS, and if you were curious, Terra's story was easily the least funny, with Ven's campaign containing the majority of the goofs and gags. This gets BBS a HAR of 3.22%, only higher than Chain of Memories. This actually lines up with where I'll place Birth by Sleep on my own tier list, but a tier above Calm, just behind KH2. Honestly, I might swap it with 2 on a given day, as BBS may have a better batting average for me personally in terms of good laps, but KH2 might win just for the sheer quantity of stuff it throws at you, even if most of its efforts are only smirk-worthy at best. Speaking of best... Oh, wait, sorry, smudge on my screen. When I said, speaking of best, I meant to say, I have to talk about Recoded now.
What's so funny?
Well, I guess it's sort of funny that Recoded is even a thing, like on an existential level. And no, not because it was conceived drunkenly, you're thinking of you. We debunked that dubious claim, if you're curious. Yeah, I don't know. Like Days, nearly everything we're looking at in Recoded is text-based, but I don't think this game has the same strengths as its DS predecessor. It's like the kitschiness of 2 mixed with the feeling of retreading super tread-on ground from Calm, which isn't the most promising formula. I think Recoded is at least a little bit funnier than Chain of Memories, but that game sort of had an excuse to be a bit mellowed out. A lot of the comedy in Recoded probably comes unintentionally in the form of how marvelously dim and dull Data Sora is, just this perpetually confused talking can of bug spray that I couldn't be paid to care about. I did get to live vicariously through the doorknob of all characters when he accused Data Sora of being the true doorknob between the two of them, and you know I counted that toward the HAR. I guess one of the things that Recoded sticks out a bit for is its tendency to make more flat-out references, which are admittedly cute and sometimes funny. For example, when talking about Cerberus, Cloud feels a sense of familiarity, and Hades makes a Go the Distance reference, which is Herc's big I Want song from the movie. My favorite is possibly one I'm reading too much into, but on Destiny Islands, when Sora asks Titus if he really found a clue regarding the blocks, Titus responds, "What do you think I've been doing all day? Having a laugh?" I'm just choosing to believe that this is the game acknowledging the infamous laugh scene from Final Fantasy X, a scene which I will defend to my death and can and will talk about at length if not tranquilized. Recoded does consistently maintain a sort of cheery attitude, if only thanks to Data Sora's edging on parody level of optimism, and maybe I find that grating and I'm being unfair. It just gives me, how are we doing tonight? Oh, come on, we can do better than that. I said, how are we doing tonight vibes. You know what I mean? Like, it's not funny, it's pleasant, but too pleasant, which is unpleasant to me. Like all of the games, though, it has its moments. For whatever reason, I'm a sucker for words being misunderstood or mispronounced, so I really like when Maleficent refers to the date escape as the date escape, or when Jafar thinks glitches are glitches. The best is probably when Pete knows he wants to say the word facsimile, but gives up and just settles on saying copy instead. Say what you will about Pete, but he knows when he's outmatched. The MVP for Recoded is actually pretty easily Hades. Like the contenders for BBS, he's only in one world, but he carries that world humor-wise, and it feels like he has some sort of quip or diction quirk more often than not. He derides Cloud's haircut, refers to him as Spike, and notes that the thing about deadly mazes is that you're supposed to die in them. At the very least, his jocular tone offsets the Goat Man, who makes me feel more dead inside each time I see him mistakenly add the number of words he's about to say. I'd be remiss not to mention that Recoded is also home to these absolute behemoths when it comes to out-of-context KH quotes.
Mickey! It's Riku! They put bugs in him!
What?
Who's to say if it's even safe inside Riku?
On top of that, we have the game wielding the word hurt in the same way that an unaccompanied 2-year-old might wield an electric razor. I generously picked out 42 moments when figuring out Recoded's HAR, earning it a 4.38%. This seems wrong to me, but I've been using the fart for this long, it's too late to question it. Recoded will go to show that a decently high HAR does not a highly ranked game make, as I'll be putting it down in C tier with Chain of Memories. Once again, I could be convinced to switch it with Calm depending on which side of the bed I wake up on, but today I'll put it one spot ahead. But I'm gonna get back in bed because it's time to enter the sleeping worlds.
They laugh together?
Humor-wise, Dream Drop is kind of like a mixture of that Disney-driven cheese of KH2, the vomitous, naive optimism of Recoded, and a handful of sleeping pills. If you hadn't guessed, DDD isn't exactly my cup of tea, though I might try a cup from Sora's Party, which is admittedly a funny, if bizarre, moment. Where did you get the Groucho glasses? Does Yensid have like a drawer of confiscated novelty items from Mickey like Ralphie's teacher in A Christmas Story? Even though I sorta knew going in that I wasn't gonna find this game terribly amusing, I was actually pretty surprised to see that Dream Drop didn't even seem to try being funny that often. This might be by virtue of Riku taking up half of the playtime and him being much less likely to engage with silly bullshit. Sora will laugh with the other characters or be laughed at by them. Riku will at most chuckle or say something a bit snarky. Like, imagine Riku having to find Olaf or getting cut in line in Land of Dragons. He'd be like, yeah, no, do you know who I am? As to be expected, Riku is something of a yin to Sora's yang, even as far as humor goes or any comedy that could be happening around them, and in Riku's case, that's usually not much. Sora's story contained more than triple the amount of funny or funny-adjacent things I found in Riku's story, which makes sense. Sora spends most of the game generally happy but ignorant, while Riku is taking things a bit more seriously, getting shit done, and bailing Sora out on a few occasions. Sora is just such a dumb little dope in this game. This goes without saying, but I was not a popular kid in school, but I would have sat at the same lunch table as every other iteration of Sora. Dream Drop Sora, I would suddenly be too cool for. I'd come up with the reason. Whatever he brings to lunch, I'm allergic to. To be clear, I wouldn't sit with Data Sora either. I would go to the school library, print Data Sora out, and then bury him in the sandbox. Data Sora has an excuse though. I mean, he's pixels. How smart could they be? 3D Sora is a dork. He's a few drop-me-nots short of a dream. As corny as I found some previous stuff, this Sora is all of that energy concentrated into one character. He's dangerously close to turning toward the camera after something goes wrong and saying, "Oh well, I guess that's the way the Keyblade crumbles." I say all of this because playing 50% of the game as a character who seems too dumb to live at times can cast something of a shadow on the way I perceive this game's humor. Something about the way Sora engages with the world and its inhabitants in this game made me feel like I was too old for this, and maybe that's just me, but KH never really made me feel that way prior to Dream Drop or since, and that could have just been due to the point I was at in my life when I played it. In fact, I'm almost sure it is. I remember looking up to Sora as I did with a lot of fictional characters who were older than me when I first experienced their media. When I was 6, I looked at him like, he's 14, he's practically an adult, he's got his shit figured out. Yet somehow 10 years later, he's dumber than I was 10 years ago, thinking Dream Eaters is Neku's name, gleefully having no idea what he's doing in the grid, and telling the guards that is so unfriendly. Sora, you fought this thing. It was called the World of Chaos. What happened to you? These things are all played for laughs and all things that went toward the horror, but Sora's airheadedness in this game just felt too overstated for my liking. Characters will sometimes tease him in KH3, but he feels in on the joke in that game. I guess this ended up being more of a discussion on Sora than one squarely focused on the game's humor, but I think the conversations are sort of intertwined when most of the attempts at comedy happen during his campaign. Once again, even after all of that, this is not to say that Dream Drop is devoid of anything genuinely funny. One of Sora's running gags in the second half of the game that I found funny instead of annoying was his consistent failure to stop referring to Mickey as Your Majesty, since he's just a plain old mouse in both worlds he appears in. Even though I think this is Axel/Lee's worst game by far, I do find it funny when he can't quite get his new name to stick. I much prefer this resignation to being referred to as his more cutthroat and complicated alter ego than
Dark Rescue's my middle name. You had your perfect little script, but you kind of forgot to write the sequel.
What is this absolute gremlin talking about? Did you think that up before you got here, or was that improv? Dream Drop doesn't pull as many jokes from the source movies as BBS or even KH2 did, probably because two of the worlds are based on Fantasia and Tron Legacy. Seriously, the grid has Sora being sorta dumb twice and Riku making a little quip, and that's all there is. But what it does have is Clue kicking Kevin Flynn, which is not only the funniest thing in Dream Drop, but the funniest thing I've ever seen in my fucking life.
Clue! Remember what you came for!
In that same vein, I'm always likely to get an unintended laugh out of Mickey being choked by Xemnas, or realizing that I've left my Twiwi characters in the microwave for too long. Speaking of The World Ends With You though, I think the bulk of the game's humor actually comes from this crew, aided by the fact that you have to visit Traverse Town 4 times across both campaigns. So when looking for the Dream Drop MVP, it eventually dawned on me that the answer was Beat. Once again, I'm just a sucker for the fragrant misuse of words, and that's like Beat's whole shtick. He's also too dumb to live, but I didn't know Beat prior to Dream Drop, so I wasn't really fatigued by his ditziness in the same way that Sora grated on me in this game. By the way, if you're typing a comment about how I misused the word fragrant, that was the point. You don't have to finish that comment. Also, it bears mentioning that you can dab in this game. Dream Drop Distance had 57 moments that I picked out when calculating its horror, and actually 16 of those came from the Dream Eater journal entries, which more often than not are a little funny or at least clever. This gives DDD a horror of 4.13%. I'll be putting it in B tier, I think behind BBS, but once again, I could see it swapping on any given day. Those journal entries and the general goofiness of the Dream Eaters themselves might give it a boost to jump one spot ahead. And you know where the first Dream Eaters come from, right? Daybreak Town.
What?
I watched Union Cross for you. Pat, when's the next video? 18 hours of Union Cross. And for what? For this little segment? Who was gonna hold it against me if I said, no, I don't really feel like doing that? Why did I decide go big or go home on this? Because if I didn't, it would nag at me. More than any comment possibly could, my brain would nag itself. So, I did it. And this fucks up the whole fart for the record, because all of the cutscenes come out to about 18 hours, but I had no real way of factoring gameplay length into this, unlike all the other games we've covered so far, so I'm upset about that. And for the record, Union Cross isn't like completely devoid of humor, it was just so long. The vast majority of jokes here come from Disney characters, and very often pulled word for word from the movies, like more than any other game by far. To be expected, considering, save for some KH3 sequences, no game is dedicated to recreating a Disney movie plot in the way that Union Cross is. Because what the fuck else are we gonna do with Aladdin for the 6th time? Like always up to this point, some of these pulls are good, although they really lean on the Doc stuff during Dwarf Woodlands this time, but I tend to find most of the Wreck-It Ralph stuff to be pretty enjoyable. And to its credit, Union Cross does sometimes have decently funny bits original to the game, sometimes aided by its cutesier art style. For as little screen time as Strelitzia gets, she has some funny little animations that convey a lot of personality. It's not intentional, but I sometimes giggle whenever the player opens their big stupid mouth when they're happy. Which, yeah, when a character is canonically known as Player, you might have guessed that they're not going to be the biggest joker. To call them the straight man to a zanier character in any interaction might be an overstatement, since you can probably count the amount of times they actually speak on your fingers. They actually lampshade this in a funny way when Calhoun preemptively tells the player to shut up, even though there is a very low chance that they were actually going to say anything. There's also this bit where she and the Space Marines light Felix the fuck up, which I don't remember if that happens in the movie, but it did stick out to me as pretty funny. I do have to report that Union Cross marks the likely final appearance of Phil's inability to count. While he shows up in KH3, he's famously mute, and we have no way of knowing if he is now capable of correctly forecasting the amount of words he's about to speak. I just want to say, this gag is used 14 times throughout the series. You know how many times it happens in Hercules the movie? 4 times. Phil does it 3 times, and Herc does it once. Why they fixated on this one gag and milked it for far more than it was ever worth, I have no idea. There are a handful of legitimately funny bits though, like here when Genie is asking for Aladdin's name and the player gives theirs and Genie's like, oh, I wasn't talking to you. Look how embarrassed and defeated they look. For whatever reason, I actually laughed when the Mad Hatter poured a shit ton of sugar into the player's teacup, though I was watching many of these scenes at a higher speed, so that may have made it look funnier to me. But nothing could have prepared me for rediscovering this. Full disclosure, I did not keep up with Union Cross as it came out. I would sort of catch it in chunks whenever they decided to release something that wasn't 4 hours of chasing a boo through the fucking desert. The first time I saw this, I thought it was an edited screenshot. They'll start at Key, become unchained, and fulfill their duty through Union Cross. This is real, and I know it makes sense in the context of the game, technically maybe if you squint, but this would be like if Master Xehanort looked at the camera and said, "First there's a birth, then you say bye, and then you go to sleep." Wow, that explains everything. I guess the MVP for Union Cross is Chirithy, but it's really not heads and shoulders above the other options. It's mostly just snarky toward the player and a bit full of itself at times, which is played for laughs. I counted 92 funnies in Union Cross, which gives us a HAR of 8.53%, but like I said, this is thrown off by not having the gameplay, if you want to call it that, factored into the game length, so it's undoubtedly way too high. Not on my tier list though, I'll put it down in C tier. Honestly, I wouldn't overthink its placement over or under its neighbors here, but I'll put it in the middle. Let's move on to something with a lighter tone. God, my stomach hurts from this game. Aqua is a laugh riot.
Only your heart is hollow enough to be a demon's. I know I promised to wake you up. I'm sorry. I took it for granted. I thought I had nothing in life to lose.
Yes, we really are covering this. Not that there's a ton to do here. I really like 0.2, but it ain't exactly a gutbuster. And I don't get it. Like, sure, you're depressed and in hell for 10 years, but if I'm Aqua, I'm using this time to perfect all of my impressions and make several fun noises with my mouth and or armpits. Develop a solid Type 5, rehab arguments in your head where this time you're the winner. Aqua had a decade to become the funniest character in the cast, and the funniest thing she says in her next game is this.
He did it. He opened Kingdom Hearts.
No, but obviously, the lack of humor here serves 0.2's story and atmosphere well. This is one of the darkest and most desperate chapters for any character in the series, and the game is not going to let you think otherwise for a second. It doesn't help that Aqua spends 3/4 of the game by herself, not exactly anyone to do bits with. The closest we get to some solo comedy is Aqua finding and choosing to wear a pair of Minnie Mouse ears as she fights depression. Now that's smiling through the pain. I mean, that's a funny thing to do, right? Wearing the ears of a monarch you met one time, we can take that. Speaking of mouse monarchs, the unintentionally funny moment of this game is the reveal of shirtless Mickey. Not just how he looks, but also the knowledge that Nomura felt that, of all places, continuity is most precious here. Mickey had his tits out in KH1, so he damn better have them out here to explain that. But really, I only counted 5 potentially funny moments in 0.2, and if that seems high, you're right to think that. The sole moment I could scrounge up from Aqua's journey through the Dark World is the tiniest of laughs she shares with Mickey. The rest comes from the KH3 teaser sequence at the very end, and again, I'm being generous with what we count as potentially funny. But this whole bit in the mysterious tower and the gummy ship certainly has a lighter tone, with Sora striking poses and Riku wondering if being compared to Sora is meant to be a compliment. But go figure, the game that stars an almost entirely alone Aqua will be represented by Sora as our sort of de facto MVP here. We do wind up with a HAR of 3.33%, and yes, it's crazy that 0.2 is not at the absolute bottom, but given that it's only roughly 150 minutes, it does make sense that its HAR is higher than 2 other games. But on my own tier list, 0.2 safely belongs in the darkest depths of the D tier. Make no mistake though, I like this short romp through the realm of darkness for what it is, and I'd rather play it over the last 3 things we talked about, no contest. But let's move on over to its neighbor on the 2.8 final chapter prologue, which is a funny name in its own right. Yes, we're doing back cover too.
Please tell me you're joking.
It's almost as if they knew 0.2 was such a bummer they needed to put something with a stronger funny bone on the same disc. And I don't really see a need to bury the lead here, so let's make it clear up front that the MVP is the MOM. This guy got like real laughs out of me, and we're talking college-aged, no prospects, zero light when you look in his eyes pat. I remember texting my friend Kiwi the night 2.8 released and being in consensus that this guy was probably the funniest original character the series has produced. And I know this type of character can be polarizing, the sort of flippant and eccentric villain who's goofing around when everyone else is being serious, but I really haven't seen too much criticism of the Master. And I think it's because we know that's not his only mode. He's not just going to be a goof for this whole arc, we see him get serious and cunning both here and in his mobile appearances. And while we've had characters in the past known for having a sillier side like Xigbar or Demyx, please don't say it, we have something special with the Master of Masters here. And that's the fact that this guy loves fucking with people. Master Xehanort will fuck up your life, but the Master of Masters will just fuck with you. Both you, the audience, and the characters around him. And he takes such glee in it, you know he's having a ball. And I think a huge aspect of the Master's funniness is the fact that it totally caught us off guard. We've never really had a character in these games who acts this mischievous and irreverent. Least of all a villain, which I think we can probably assume he's going to at least be an antagonist to Sora. This is just turning into a thought piece on the Master, but I'm all in on this guy, because all of our previous villains have all been the same dude. I mean that both literally and figuratively. Yes, Ansem, Xemnas, and Xehanort are all distinct characters with their own nuances, but they're all effectively the same imposing, intelligent, super powerful, serious guy. There are still some common threads here when we compare these guys to the Master, but he does his business with such a flair and showmanship, and we've hardly even seen him yet. Him and Master Xehanort both have these complicated, twisty-turny plans that they poured a lot of time into. But whereas with Xehanort I believe that it's his life's work, it would make more sense that the Master slapped his scheme together the night before the due date because he's just that type of dude. So to me, the Master isn't just funny, he's refreshing, and to circle back to the delivery conversation we had however long ago, Ray Chase is just crushing it as this guy, and I'm obviously not the first person to say that. The whole "oh, you think that's gross" segment is one of the funniest moments across the series.
My eye, to be exact.
Ew! Oh, you think that's gross, do ya?
No.
Yeah, sure.
As funny as the Master is, I think it's nearly as funny how his apprentices just have no idea how to handle the guy. You get the impression that they've all studied under the Master for at least years, yet it seems like they're still kept on their toes. His demeanor changes at the drop of a hat, and he goes from calmly explaining someone's role to doing voices or a bit. He even does impressions of my Twitch chat watching me do a challenge run.
He's terrible at this.
It really does raise a few questions as to why the foretellers look so surprised when the Master gets on his bullshit, but I could be reading too deep into it. Back cover had 12 moments I picked out to calculate its HAR, which gives us a massive 19.4%. As you could probably guess, nearly all of these moments were Master driven, with a small amount of credit to Luxu for dumbly thinking the Keyblade was actually called No Name. It might seem dramatic, but given that this little hour-long movie made me genuinely laugh more times than the last 4 or 5 games we've covered, I think it's only fair to put back cover in the A tier and in the lead. But now, the moment you've all been waiting for.
You might be surprised.
Yeah, but we're actually talking about Dark Road now. Look, I know it came out after KH3, but who's gonna stick around to hear about Dark Road? Well, I don't know, like Eric has said, you might be surprised. When it comes to funniness in the KH series, Dark Road is kind of like a burger joint that everyone hypes up, and you always hear about how it's this hidden gem, like people say you might not expect it to be even good, but it's actually amazing. And then you go to the place yourself, and it's fine. No, I mean, it's good. The way everyone acted could have convinced me this was a very funny burger, though. Is it just me? To a degree, I get it. Dark Road is a lot shorter than Union Cross, its mobile predecessor slash fellow concurrent app thing. I do this for a living, and even I struggle to keep track of how all that worked. I'm pretty sure COVID turned this thing into something even shorter than originally intended, so when we got a funny bit here or there, it really stuck with people. And don't get me wrong, I agree that the bits are funny, but I think Dark Road's comedic reputation morphed from underrated to overrated. Like, I think the whole bit with Ericus walking like a carpet is what people remember when they think of Dark Road in a humor-oriented context. And to be sure, it's a good bit, it's funnier than like 90% of anything, if not everything, in Union Cross, but I think some of us may have falsely remembered how funny the rest of the game is. Yes, there's also Verd chucking the boulder like it's nothing, what else you got? A third of the game's humor, at least according to my by now well-established deeply flawed system, is the gang just taking turns shitting on Ericus. Oh haha, he's always late, he's a coward, he runs away. This sort of constant verbal abuse is what turns a growing boy into someone who will murder his adopted son. And I mean, it's constant. I don't mean to be a hater, it's still good, it's a fun dynamic between the lowerclassmen, and we even get a fun follow-up, or I guess prelude, to the young Xehanort and Master of Masters scene from Remind, where the Master gets to show his comedic chops some more. I do think the MVP award here belongs to Ericus, if only because he deserves a consolation prize for getting absolutely pummeled by his peers for the entire game. His friendship with Xehanort is fun and feels like a natural extension of those chess scenes we got of the two in KH3. It's sort of surreal to see Xehanort make a few quips here and there, and a nice change of pace to have a mobile game protagonist who will talk to people more than once a month. For as short as the game is, at least cutscene-wise, at roughly 4 hours and 10 minutes, it's hitting pretty often, which I greatly respect. I picked out 37 moments, netting Dark Road a HAR of 14.8%, once again to be taken with a grain of salt considering I had no good way of measuring a typical Dark Road playthrough. Which is a shame, because these card battles are truly a roller coaster of laughs. I want to give it credit for having a lot more personality and charm than Union Cross by my estimation, so I'll be slotting Dark Road in the B tier just behind KH2. Okay, now we can move on to you-know-who.
Ah! Surprise, bitch. I bet you thought you'd seen the last of me.
Look, I know it came out after KH3, but who's gonna stick around to hear about Melody and Memory? Guys, Melmem is not funny. I know, right? Who could've guessed? The rhythm game with like 7 actual cutscenes is not cracking a ton of jokes. It's okay though, I didn't really expect it to, but I did laugh out loud when Kairi referred to one of the KH3 worlds as a fairy tale kingdom because it is so funny to me that they refuse to say Corona now. Other than that, it's sort of funny when you get that one trick in versus mode where the enemies splat onto the screen. As for cutscenes, the only thing I could really pick out was Mickey trying to leave the tower but getting dogpiled by Donald and Goofy, so I guess we're giving the MVP award to Goofy. It's not called a duck pile after all. This means Melmem gets a HAR of 0.34%. It is somehow less funny than 0.2 by both metrics we're using today, and it will snugly fit at the very bottom of the tier list. Alright, I'm pretty sure there's no other games left to cover besides... No, alright, let's do KH3 now.
We need a bigger burst of laughter!
Finally, we've arrived at the entire reason I wanted to do this project. KH3 is the funniest. It's the funniest game, guys. Bloop, right up there.
It's funny how it was such a disappointment. Pretty funny how it played like shit until Rima—
Shut up. Shut up, you fucking gargoyle, you joyless warlock. This is not the time or place for that discussion. Say what you will about the game's story or how it played, and say it in a different comment section, please. I've said my piece on KH3, as has everyone else on the internet, although it seems like there are more and more people saying their very long piece on it each and every day until we die, but I don't want to fight. I'm sorry I called you a goblin or whatever. We're never all gonna get along when it comes to KH3 as a video game, but can we at least all agree it's the funniest? Why does no one ever talk about how it's clearly the funniest? Everyone's so busy taking umbrage with the writing. Some people don't like what these characters are saying when they're being serious. But I think this game deserves more praise for what the characters are saying when they're trying to be funny. There are still some weird lines and awkward pauses sometimes, though you're gonna get that in every game. But the headline for KH3 is banter. I think KH3 is unparalleled when it comes to banter, and it really enhanced the experience for me. A massive part of KH3's comedic success in my eyes is the perfection of the Sora, Donald, and Goofy relationship. To me, the last time it felt meaningfully explored was Chain of Memories. I still think that game is king when it comes to the more serious, plot-related conversations between the three, but I think Cage 3 is where the trio finally feels like it's hitting its stride, and it's entirely possible that it took this long because we needed time to establish a history and true camaraderie between them. I feel a stronger sense of continuity here, like when they have a name for Sora's dumbass face from KH1, or they talk about how much Sora likes pirates in the Caribbean. I really believe in the friendship in a way that I didn't in KH1 or 2. I think 3 taps into that energy that I really enjoyed about Days, and while the situation isn't nearly as dire or personal as often, SCG just feel like a more dynamic and believable trio here. My estimation of both the trio and Sora on his own skyrocketed after KH3 because they didn't just feel like a cheerful avatar and his 2 inoffensive Disney companions. I'm not saying they're being super subversive and that their core personalities are dramatically different, I'm just saying it feels like there was a lot more fun being had writing them and their interactions this go around. A self-awareness maybe, not in an explicit Axel pseudo wink at the camera way, which I can also appreciate, but a self-awareness about what the players enjoy about these characters and their personalities. Sora is still optimistic and foolhardy, Donald is skeptical and grumpy, and Goofy is like the relaxed mediator, and it seems like they all know that about themselves and freely talk about it. There are a few jokes made about Sora being a ditz, but Sora's in on the joke, he's laughing about it too, and it just comes off as some organic ribbing between friends. And maybe that's just me, maybe it hits hard for me, and to you I'm coming off like a guy who talks to the moon, but it is my truth.
Sora can be reckless, and Donald grumbles a lot.
It's true.
But you can trust him.
I suspect you do.
It's true.
Huh? He does?
Although, Donald, you do lose your temper a lot, so I can relate to wanting some alone time.
What? I don't do that.
I don't really know what the consensus is on the voice acting in KH3, there's only so much discourse my mortal body can endure, but I tend to really like it. I'm not saying everyone is hitting it out of the park, there are some clunker performances for sure, but when they're good, I think they're really good. At the very least, there were fewer instances of emphasis being placed on the wrong words.
Too many worlds.
You and your messed up memories are always in the way. Sora!
I'm a bad guy, so you have to go through me.
I have to think that my enjoyment of a lot of these jokes and bits can be credited to the voice acting, timing, and delivery being punched up a little. I don't think those things have ever been the strongest suit for KH as a series, and there are certainly contemporary examples that do that stuff better, but in my opinion, these things have improved with each numbered title. I struggle to put my finger on the exact quality that I like here, but I guess it just doesn't feel quite as cheesy or Disney Channel-ish. I get the impression that doing a lot of these same bits in KH1, 2, or BBS wouldn't hit quite as well because of how those games paced their dialogue and how the voices were directed. Some examples I picked out for this include the conversation between Demyx and Vexen and solely explaining Mike's contact joke to Sora.
Do you get it?
Yeah, it's 'cause his eye's so big. The joke is, you can't lose a contact the size of a dinner plate.
Come on, dude. I'm useless. I'm chicken. We're not friends. I can count the number of times you and I have hung out on one hand. Less than one hand. I didn't even know you in the old life. Fine.
I feel like prior to KH3, we didn't often get these sorts of interactions between characters, like even the tones of voices in these scenes felt somewhat new to the series. And I think in this game, more than any other in the series, the comedy we get is more character-driven and dialogue-centric as opposed to situational humor. I feel like I could watch SDG or some of the organization members just sit in a room with each other and bullshit for an hour with no other stimuli or plot to push them along. Now more than ever, the bulk of the comedy comes from not just what a character is saying, but how the character they're talking to responds. As much as I love the slapstick in 1 and liked some of the one-liners or quips in 2, it feels like 3 really excels in having a handful of fun, funny back and forths. And it's not like KH3 doesn't have those other things either, because it does, and they usually land for me. KH3 also has a massive advantage of being fully voiced, as well as having more talkative party members that might have something funny to say now and then during gameplay. When comparing this to games with tons of text bubbles and entirely silent chunks of exploration outside of effort noises, KH3 feels 10 times more lively and has more opportunities to go for the jocular jugular. And given that I think the delivery on the comedic stuff in 3 is usually pretty strong, the fact that not a single piece of dialogue is imprisoned in a text box is a huge boon for the game's humor potential. Even the journal entries for the enemies are the funniest they've ever been. Like, I don't know if Jiminy's taken uppers during this game or what, but he's on a roll here. They're not gut busters or anything, but most of them are cute at worst and genuinely pretty funny at best. We should circle back to the idea of pulling gags and bits from the movies, since Cage 3 very noticeably adheres to the movies on 3 occasions and will still comedically draw from movies whose worlds have more original plots like Monstropolis. Even though some of these moments are like shot-for-shot recreations with SDG sorta lingering in the background like Rapunzel's depressed/hyped montage, I still think they work. For the record, I hadn't seen Tangled prior to playing Cage 3, so I was actually surprised to learn that they pulled it straight from the movie after the fact. But like, good job, that was a good thing that you pulled from the movie. The same thing sorta goes for Luxord getting pirate breathed off the ship. I had seen all the Pirates movies but had forgotten that this happens just with a different character, but this still hit for me mainly because it's happening to literal time wizard and increasingly important original character in Luxord. It's like the perfect way to remix a movie gag for Kingdom Hearts. The same goes for Yidis Vanitas, an excellent extension of the door-based gags in Monsters Inc. Which, yes, I do think they intended for that to be funny. I don't think they intended Woody laying the verbal smackdown on young Xehanort to be as funny as we found it. That's just classic, quintessential Cage absurdity, something that is being performed with 100% sincerity but is the closest thing to objective hilarity we can find in the series. Other Cage 3 occasions that hit my funny bone despite not aiming for it include Donald exclaiming "Let's get it" before the skull fight, Dark Riku slapping real Riku to the ground, and Hero, Baymax, and SDG leaving Gogo to die as the San Francisco World logo fills the screen. I just want to list off all the other Cage 3 moments that got a laugh out of me in addition to the examples I've already mentioned, because unlike the other games, I actually have a lot of them and they all deserve at least some attention, bearing in mind that these range from giggles to hearty guffaws. The 2.9 reveal, naturally, Sora wondering where the fanfare is and doing the most pathetic mouth trumpet, Hades singing Maleficent and Pete toward the exit, Riku assuring Mickey that Aqua is strong like Sora and that's where the similarities end, Sora admitting that he cannot computer, SDG agreeing to Flynn's sidekick deal, the party inhaling helium and galaxy toys, the LGMs lamenting that Nirvana will not be reached, SDG being excited to talk to Riku and Mickey only for it to be fucking boring old Ienzo, the notion that Sora cannot count, shout out to Phil, Olaf calling Sora silly spiky grass, all of the organization banter in the makeshift throne room, Hainer hey losering Ansem the seeker of motherfucking darkness, Axel being fed up with everyone's complicated connections topped off with the appearance of Jiminy Cricket, the Master of Masters going,
"Oh, tell me more."
Demyx saying Demyx time and Riku being visibly distressed, and Sid thinking that Sora fought a shadowy group called Battalion something. I could get into the nuts and bolts for hours, but at the end of the day, this game made me laugh and smile more than all of the other games combined, and that's really not an exaggeration. I didn't feel too old for it, even though some might argue that I am, and it didn't feel like the game rested on its laurels and just played the hits again. And you know what? I'm thrilled to say that my MVP for Cage 3 is the boy himself, Sora, and not through some loophole like being the only person to smile in 0.2, he earned this one. Whether he's making jokes or being the butt of them, I think this is our funniest Sora by far, not too dumb, not too angsty, he's a perfect comedic Goldilocks in this game.
What's so funny?
You already know where the game goes on my tier list, but as for the horror, I picked out 224 funnies in Cage the Third, which gives us a neat 11.1%. When discounting the game that is actually a movie and a game I could not get a full playthrough runtime for, Cage 3 also scores the highest using the fart. All is right in the world. Now, about this robot foot. I'm not a Star Wars guy. Is this foot attached to a particularly funny robot? I'm mad at you. I'm mad. Not at all of you, just some of you. I don't want to squat like this for the whole outro. As a teaser for this video, I posted the final tier list, and a bunch of people, I know not all of you are subscribed or have seen all my videos, but a bunch of you thought that I thought that like Dark Road and Cage 2 were on the same tier, that I liked any game more than Cage 1, and that bums me out, because that either means you don't know me at all, or you're not listening. I do have a way to fix this. You know, I have something over 100 videos on the channel at this point. And some of them are, you know, shit posts, maybe little low effort meme type things, but there's a lot of good stuff in there. But I'm worried maybe people don't know, like, what's really worth watching, what's really the stuff you gotta dig into. So I made this playlist called the Regular Pat Essentials. It's all the stuff that I think is part of like the main canon, like the main chronology, you know? So hopefully everyone will just watch all these videos and I'll never be misconstrued again for kind of purposely posting something that could potentially lead to being misunderstood. But it was for a teaser. Anyway, I had a lot of fun making this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it. If you did, leaving a like, and if you want to see more junk like that, then you can subscribe. I can't tell you what to do though. Who am I? And if you want to keep up with me anywhere, I am on Twitter, I am on Twitch, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6, usually Saturdays at 4 Eastern. I've also got a Discord and, you know, the Patreon. That's all for me. Stay safe out there, and I'm gonna go no life Tears of the Kingdom. Take it easy. Bye.